You're listening to Autumn on the Air, the weekly podcast that brings you conversations about the impact of research commercialization and the people who make it happen. Join us for interviews with patent and licensing professionals, innovators, entrepreneurs, and tech transfer leaders on the issues and trends that matter most. Keep listening for an inside track on the people, IP policies, and politics changing our world.
Today on Autumn on the Air, we're honored to welcome Dr. Kirk Adams, Ph.D., a visionary leader, transformative speaker, and lifelong advocate for disability inclusion. With over 3 decades of experience advancing accessibility and creating opportunities for individuals who are blind or visually impaired, Dr. Adams has become a powerful force for change in the realms of leadership, accessibility, and inclusion. Dr. Adams' journey began with navigating vision loss as a young child, an experience that shaped his commitment to breaking down barriers and empowering others. His personal story, marked by resilience and determination, has uniquely equipped him to help organizations understand, integrate, and champion inclusive practices that benefit all. As a former president and CEO of the American Foundation for the Blind, also known as AFB, Dr. Adams dedicated his tenure to charting new paths in accessibility, forging alliances across industries, and championed systemic changes to promote inclusion for over 20 million Americans with vision loss. He has consulted with technology giants like Google, Facebook, and Microsoft to ensure that emerging technologies are designed with everyone in mind. His leadership extended to advocating for policy changes and collaborating with key leaders in finance, public policy, education, and nonprofit sectors. Prior to his leadership at AFB, Dr. Adams served as president and CEO of the Lighthouse for the Blind, Inc., where he pioneered initiatives to provide employment and independence for people who are blind or deafblind. His focus on employment equity and community integration resulted in expanded opportunities and lasting impact for hundreds of individuals. He has contributed his expertise to numerous boards and task forces, including the Governor's Task Force on Disability Employment, the Braille Authority of North America, and the World Blind Union. Academically, Dr. Adams holds a bachelor's degree in economics from Whitman College, a master's in not-for-profit leadership from Seattle University, a master's in leadership and change from Antioch University, and a Ph.D. from Antioch University, where his dissertation explored the successful employment of blind adults in American corporations. This blend of academic achievement and lived experience gives him a deep understanding of the structural barriers faced by individuals with disabilities, knowledge he passionately shares to inspire transformative change. Currently, as the managing director of Innovative Impact, LLC, Dr. Adams partners with organizations to foster workplace accessibility and inclusion, accelerating the integration of people with disabilities into the workforce. He is a highly sought-after keynote speaker known for his authenticity, warmth, and ability to inspire audiences across sectors to rethink their approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Dr. Adams' message is clear. Inclusion benefits everyone, and together we can build a world where opportunity is accessible to all. Dr. Adams resides in Seattle, Washington, where he continues his advocacy, builds strategic partnerships, and enjoys life with his family. His passion and leadership remain at the forefront of the movement towards a more inclusive future, one conversation at a time. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Adams.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, really excited to have you on the podcast today. And I thought maybe the best way to kick things off was to ask you if you could share a little bit about your own personal journey and how it shaped your commitment to disability advocacy and leadership.
Sure. So way back, I was born as a sighted child, and then at age 5 became a blind child. Both of my retinas detached. I had some emergency surgery that was unsuccessful and became totally blind very quickly. My parents were in their mid-20s. I was born when they were in college, and they were told that I could not return to the neighborhood school. I needed to go to the state school for the blind kids. So they were living north of Seattle. They visited the Washington State School, were not very impressed. Someone told them the Oregon State School was great. They visited. They thought it was great. So they quit their jobs, moved us down. So I went to the Oregon State School for the Blind for first, second, and third grade, and then into public school. And I was really given 3 gifts at that school, which of course I didn't realize at the time. But now that I am an ethnographic researcher and I understand the factors that lead to success and thriving in employment for blind adults, I realized I was given 3 essential things. One was the blindness skills. Because I was totally blind, there was no question. I needed to learn Braille. I needed to learn how to travel safely, independently with a long white cane. I needed to learn how to type. It'd be keyboarding now, but I learned how to type as a 6-year-old so I could start into public school when I was ready. I'll type my assignments for my teachers who were not going to be Braille readers in public school. And I was given the gift of high expectations. There were about 120 blind kids, K-8. If blindness was your only impairment, then you were expected to be at grade level in all subjects. And my dad was a high school basketball coach. They expected me to contribute appropriately with household chores, and they didn't like to see anything less than an A on a report card. And we were expected to be involved in athletics and school activities, etc. And then the third thing I was given was this strong internal locus of control, which just means I was given the belief in my bones that I could overcome obstacles, solve problems, chart my own path. And they did that now, I know, very intentionally through a lot of experiential activities, taking us backpacking in the Three Sisters Wilderness area, up on Mount Hood in the snowfields, the Oregon coast and the tide pools. And when I did my doctoral research, my dissertation, it's called Journeys Through Rough Country, an ethnographic study of blind adults employed in large American corporations. I found that the people I interviewed who had self-described as successfully employed, almost all of them had a similar set of experiences, a lot of it to do with the outdoors, that gave them that strong internal locus of control, as opposed to the strong external locus, which means you're feeling things are happening to you. There's not much you can do about it. So I was given those 3 things. And then fast forward quite a ways from starting public school in 4th grade to graduating from Whitman College in Walla Walla with a economics degree with a Phi Beta Kappa and a cum laude and a 4.0 in my major, and then trying to find a job as a person with a apparent disability, and going through the super frustrating, arduous journey of trying to find employment that so many of us face. There's only 35% of us with significant disabilities in the workforce compared to 70% of the general population. So I was really quite shaped by that experience of applying for jobs, being interviewed on the phone, being asked to come in for the in-person interview, and then just the confusion that set in across the desk from me, as the person interviewing me had probably never worked with a blind person before, didn't know what we were capable of, the tools we use, the technologies we use. And so then I started disclosing that in my cover letter, saying I am totally blind, have been since age 5. Here's how I've done what I've done. Here's how I'll do the job I'm applying for. And then I wasn't even getting the phone interviews. So I had that experience, and so many of us do, sending out 10 times as many resumes and going on 10 times as many interviews as our peers without impairments. And that really, after 10 years in banking and finance, not really enjoying it, but making a living and getting married and buying a house and having kids and the things I wanted to do, I pivoted into the nonprofit sector and really got clear that I wanted to devote myself to creating environments and opportunities for other people with disabilities blind people in particular to thrive, and in particular in employment.
So, given all that, it's an incredible story, how have your experiences as a person with a disability influenced your approach to leadership and innovation?
Yeah, well, as far as leadership goes, I got really clear that leadership was the best lever that I could bring to bear to make change, significant change. There are very few blind people leading organizations that serve blind people. Most leaders are sighted, which I felt really needed to be rectified. So I did go back to school. I got a master's in not-for-profit leadership, and later on I earned the Ph.D. in leadership and change, because I really felt leadership was, again, the thing that I could bring to bear. And I will tell you, the Lighthouse for the Blind here in Seattle, they hired me as their development director. I entered the nonprofit sector through becoming a fundraising person. And they hired me to start their foundation and their fundraising program. And I'd been there about 5 years, and the CEO called me into his office. He was sighted. He'd been there 20 plus years. And he said, part of my legacy, I want a blind person in this office. When I retire, and I'm going to retire in about 3 years, would you like to do what it would take to be qualified to be considered for this job? And I said I would. And to their credit, they spent a lot of time, effort, and money on me. They hired a consultant. We mapped my knowledge, skills, and abilities against those that would be required for the CEO position. Wherever there was a gap, we put together a development plan, and I worked on that for about a year and a half. And a prime example, the Lighthouse, really cool organization. They employ blind and deafblind people in a number of businesses, one of which is aerospace manufacturing. So been a Boeing supplier since the 1950s. So about 120 blind and deafblind machinists doing advanced precision machining of aluminum, titanium, making thousands of parts for each Boeing plane. And I did not have an aerospace background. I didn't know anything about it. So I had to learn the ISO standards for aerospace, how the supply chain worked, sit in on the annual negotiations of the Boeing contract. So that's just one example of an area that I really needed to learn. And they made the effort to prepare me so that when my predecessor retired and the board hired a search firm, I was qualified. And they gave me that opportunity to lead the organization, which I did for 8 years. And we had wonderful successes as far as growing the number of blind and deafblind people we employed, the number of locations, the wages. We drove wages up 40% across the board to bring everyone up to a good livable wage. And then I was recruited to the board of the American Foundation for the Blind, which was Helen Keller's organization, kind of the oldest, most iconic blindness organization. And something very similar. There'd been a CEO was blind. He'd been there 20 plus years. And he took me aside one day and said, I'm going to retire in 2 years. And I think you would be the best person to lead AFB into the second century. So I was in the midst of my Ph.D. program, and our children were out and away and self-sufficient. And I talked to my wife and said, there's only one AFB and there's only one me. I have one career. And this is a national level leadership opportunity. And so I did apply, and I was given that great honor to be the president and CEO of the American Foundation for the Blind. We moved from our peaceful neighborhood here in Seattle to New York City, and lived in Brooklyn and worked in Manhattan, and then moved the headquarters to the DC area, so moved into Arlington, Virginia. So I had a vast range of experiences in leading AFB and reshaping the organization to a public policy and research and leadership organization.
Incredible. And, I want to go back to something you touched on a little bit earlier, which was the challenges you faced when you were trying to find a job.
Yeah.
What are some of the most common barriers to workforce inclusion for people with disabilities? And how do you think organizations can start to address some of those?
Yeah, the main barrier, and this is research based, it's either number one or number two. One is transportation, one is employer attitudes. So it's just a matter of employers not having exposure to people with significant disabilities and understanding the capabilities and the tools and technologies we use. But even greater than that, not understanding that the lived experience of disability gives us unique opportunities to develop strengths in areas that are really important in the workplace. So, we develop, as human beings, we develop strengths by overcoming increasingly difficult challenges. And if you're going to be a chess champion or an Olympic athlete or a concert musician, you're going to intentionally be set increasingly difficult challenges. But living with a significant disability as we go through life and through school and into the workplace, family life, community life, we are faced with increasingly difficult challenges daily. And we have ample opportunity to develop resilience and persistence and creative problem solving and the ability to analyze and manage risk and ability to work in diverse teams and good listening skills and good communication skills, good organizational skills, which are necessary for us to thrive as people with disabilities in the world that wasn't constructed with us in mind. So we have ample challenges. And so I think the opportunity is for employers to begin to understand that if they want to create the most competitive, adaptable, innovative workforce, that they can do themselves a great service toward their mission by being intentionally inclusive of people with disabilities in their workforce.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. And I'm curious to know your view on the role that accessible innovation plays in helping to create a more inclusive workplace.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the distinction between an impairment and a disability. So I have an impairment, visually impaired. I cannot see, but that doesn't mean I'm always in disabling situations. So the example I often use is if I'm running a board meeting, which I've done many, many times, and I'm sitting at the head of the conference table and I've got my agenda in Braille, my committee reports and my financials, I can run that meeting as effectively as anyone can. But if I sit down at the head of the conference table and someone hands me a stack of print and said, "Here's your materials," my impairment does not allow me to interact efficiently with the built environment of that printed material. So I'm in a disabling situation. So another example I use a lot if I'm in a group meeting with an audience, I'll say, "Is anyone in here 5'2" or shorter? Clap. Someone will always clap. And I say, if you walk into a room and there's a package you need and it's on a shelf that's 8 feet off the floor, your characteristic of your height does not allow you to interact with the built environment of the height of that shelf. So you're going to have to get a tool, like a step stool, or you're going to have to form a team with a taller person to get the package down. And then you might want to modify your environment. You might want to build a lower shelf for next time. So that's really what we're talking about, is creating the best fit we can between the person, their impairments, and the digital, social, and built environment. So we want to reduce those number of disabling situations as much as we can so that the person can interact with their environment, bring their whole selves to work, contribute to the maximum of their potential. So, that's what accommodations and assistive technology and access and accessibility is all about, is reducing those disabling situations for those of us with impairments.
So you mentioned leadership, and I wanted to ask you, how can leaders foster a culture of inclusion and accessibility within their organizations?
What I recommend leaders do is think about creating an environment that fosters disclosure, self-disclosure. So when companies report on the percentage of their workforce with disabilities, it's usually 1.5% to 4%. But we know demographically that probably 15% or so of any sizable workforce are people with disabilities. 70% of disabilities are non-apparent. So the impairments can be cognitive, neurodiversity, um, mental health issues, and people are often reluctant to disclose their disability. And I think the way that leaders can really help is to start to normalize discussing impairments and how the organization is committing to creating a great fit between all of their employees in the workplace, and to do that through talking about accommodations. And accommodations can be so simple. The most common accommodation for a disability is a flexible work schedule. But it could be a larger monitor, it could be a standing desk, it could be an amplification system for a meeting room for someone who has hearing loss. So to start talking to people about the fact that the organization has a sincere, authentic desire to create the best fit between every employee and the workplace. And for those people with impairments, one way to do that is through providing tailored, customized accommodations, and to start doing that when the opportunities arise, talking about it, and ideally baking it in so that in some regular cadence, say annual performance review, a manager is pointing out, we provide accommodations for our employees with impairments, and happy to discuss if there's anything we could do to modify your workplace, your situation that would make a better fit for you here.
That's a great suggestion because I'm a patent attorney. I also have ADHD, worked in a firm my entire career, and law firms they're not really great environments for, self-disclosure if you've got something like an invisible disability. So I really like the idea that you just presented about having a manager or supervisor or somebody making the comment like, we do have these policies, and if there's anything we can do. I think that's a great suggestion because the question always comes up, well, how do you start that conversation to be able to create that inclusive culture that the person with the disability, visible or invisible, feels comfortable enough to want to disclose it?
Yep. So I think self-disclosure really catalyzed by the discussion of accommodations is the route that I recommend.
So do you have any suggestions for how you measure the impact of disability inclusion initiatives in the workplace?
Yeah, so there is some good data around that. There's not a ton of it, but there's good data. So one example is the Walgreens Warehouse and Distribution Center in Anderson, South Carolina. It was built in 2007. The head of supply chain for Walgreens at that point was Randy Lewis, who has an autistic son. And he got buy-in from Walgreens leadership to build it to be intentionally inclusive of people with developmental disabilities. And they have about 550 employees, and 40% have developmental disabilities, and they've partnered with the state vocational rehabilitation agency and the nonprofits and families. And there's a small university, Anderson University. Dr. Jeffrey Moore and his Ph.D. students have been tracking the data for the last 18 years. So there are 20 warehouse and distribution centers. They have the lowest turnover, the lowest absenteeism, the best safety, the best employee satisfaction, the best customer perceptions from the stores they serve. And that's because of disability inclusion. And Dr. Moore and his students have studied other disability inclusive organizations, departments, work groups, and they found there's a tipping point at about 20%. If 20% of a work group is self-identified as having disabilities, there's all kinds of good things that happen with the culture as far as the environment, the corporate culture becoming more empathetic, more communicative, more transparent, a spirit of active mutual support. So there's that data. DuPont did a longitudinal study over several decades of their disabled employees. The state of Arizona did one. So there's those bottom line things that you can measure, like I said, absenteeism, turnover, safety. But then there's the intangible positive impacts on culture that are really significant.
Now, a lot of our listeners for this podcast are technology transfer professionals. And I wanted to ask you, how do you think tech transfer offices can help ensure that innovations that emerge out of universities and other research institutions are accessible to people with disabilities right from the very outset?
Well, I think the true mechanism is inclusion of people with disabilities throughout all the processes. So there used to be a saying, which is still used a lot, nothing about us without us. And I say it should be nothing without us. So, the way information is transferred in organizations is through networks of people. And if you have people in those networks who have the lived experience of disability, the organization is going to have a greater quantity and a greater quality of information about disability, lived experience of disability, inclusion, accessibility. So I would say if you really want to get down to the bottom line, you want to be hiring people with disabilities throughout whatever organization you're involved in, rather than asking outsiders for opinions, to have people in the work groups who have that lived experience and are tied obviously to their communities, their advocacy groups, etc.
So are there any particular strategies that you've seen that work well for integrating universal design principles into a commercialization process?
Yes, and I would say again, my little analogy, it's easier to put the blueberries in the muffins before you bake them. So
Definitely.
to have
Tastes
people
better
with
too.
a lived to have people with a lived experience of disability involved as team members from the beginning of these processes as much as possible. So you obviously my passions point to people with disabilities. So I think having people with disabilities in the mix, not just as accessibility people or DEI people, but in typical roles in a work group, a team, a department. I think Microsoft across the lake here from me in Redmond, Washington, is a pretty prime example of that. There's probably 300 blind people on that campus who are in all kinds of roles: programmers, coders, team leaders. They have done a wonderful job of hiring people who are neurodivergent and creating a playbook on how to do that. They've shared that with all their 2,000 vendors. They're encouraging them to be inclusive of people who are neurodivergent in their workplaces.
So you've mentioned data in various studies a couple times now, and I wanted to ask you, how important do you think it is for technology transfer offices to collect and use demographic data like disability status to help inform their inclusion initiatives?
Oh, it's so important. Demographics tell us one thing. They give us the idea of how things are shaped, but actual data is pretty scarce and so powerful as far as usage by people with disabilities. So, the curb cut effect, how our wheelchair using brothers and sisters occupied the federal building in San Francisco, got out of their wheelchairs and crawled up the Capitol steps so the curb cut mandates would be enforced and the ramps would be created to lead from the sidewalk to the street. And now less than half a percent of the people who use curb cuts are wheelchair users. So it's bicyclists and skateboarders and people with shopping carts and parents with strollers. And that was started by disability advocacy. Same with closed captioning, the CVAA, the Communications Video Accessibility Act, mandated that a certain amount of programming would include closed captioning, which was driven by the deaf community. And now over 50% of people who watch television turn on the closed captions. Talking books started by the American Foundation for the Blind and Helen Keller and Eleanor Roosevelt created for people who are blind. Up until the early 70s, it was not legal for a book to be recorded, other than used by people who are print disabled. And now, of course, everyone listens to audiobooks. So to track that, the usage in particular, and to understand those narrative arcs of how what's good for people with disabilities, like a curb cut, it's good for everybody.
So, Kirk, I wanted to ask you, how's the conversation around disability rights and inclusion evolved over the course of your career?
Yeah, well, it's evolved a lot. And one analogy I like to use is kind of the environmental movement. It started out, don't litter, ad campaigns. Now it's become the green choice, LEED buildings, the carbon footprint, zero waste stream. It's common vernacular now. And when I was a blind kid in the 60s, campaigns were hire the handicapped. It was considered a charitable act. And now we're talking about innovation and accessibility and assistive technologies that translate into support for the general population. So it's become much more center stage as far as discussions around the workplace and how to create an effective organization.
So how can partnerships between technology transfer offices, disability advocacy groups, and industry help to accelerate the development and adoption of accessible technologies?
Well, I say it's community, to form and be in community. So I encourage people who don't have an impairment, who are interested in accelerating disability inclusion and accessibility, to get involved in some form or fashion with the community. So I just recommend people take 5 minutes, think about an impairment that resonates with you, whether you have a family member or a former classmate, or you saw a movie, if it's deafness, blindness, mobility impairment, cognitive impairment. Grab a search engine, put in the name of the impairment, put in the name of your city, and then write in advocacy or organization or association, and something will come up. And at the very least, go to a website and sign up for a newsletter. You can go as deep as you want as far as attending meetings and getting involved. But that's back to that proximity around attitudes and employer attitudes and understanding, and really being at the heart of these issues. So I'd say join community with people with a lived experience of disability. Allies are always welcome.
Yeah, I have a niece with Down syndrome and have been very involved in some of the Down syndrome organizations. And what I will say is when you get involved, you really meet some wonderful, fantastic people, and you learn so much more about a community that you had no idea about than you would have otherwise.
That's that.
So what role do you see for policy, whether it's at the institutional, state, or federal level, in advancing disability inclusive tech transfer?
Policy, I would, and the AFB is a policy organization. So it's really back to what I said, nothing without us. So to just explicitly name disability inclusion and accessibility in all policies, 15% or so of everybody in the country has a disability. The European Accessibility Act, which just went into force, is a beautiful thing. That's going to drive a lot of policy here in the United States, with requirements of people doing business in Europe needing to comply with accessibility standards. So I would say to just ensure the language is always there. Disability is always mentioned. Accessibility is always mentioned. Assistive technologies are mentioned explicitly in policy.
So are there any particular policy or advocacy efforts that you believe are really urgently needed today?
Well, it's really the key legislations that the acts of Congress are in place. So the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Rehab Act, the Individual Disability Education Act. So really to preserve implementation and enforcement of those things. And disability isn't explicitly tied to the elimination of references to DEI. There's accessibility and assistive technologies are still the law of the land. So we want to we want to maintain those realities. I think is the most important thing, is to preserve what we have.
Are there any emerging trends or challenges with respect to people with disabilities that you think the tech transfer and the research commercialization community should be aware of?
Yeah, well, AI, artificial intelligence, is the thing.
Is a big one.
These large language models, the AI is based on data, and the data comes through technology use, people using technology. And people with disabilities use technology to a lesser extent than people without impairments. So our data is underrepresented. So there's a great danger in bias, ableist bias being built into these things. I asked one search in one AI tool, what's a good job for a person who's blind? It said, lawyer, piano tuner, masseuse.
Oh my!
And then
wow.
I asked the one that I pay to use that has my corpus of information in it, and of course it gave a much more balanced answer, and basically said any occupation, is fair game for a person with a disability to pursue. So that is a real thing, and so I think that's something to be aware of. Right now, all the rage. There's a big assistive technology conference called CSUN that started at Cal State University Northridge in March in Anaheim. I went, and the big buzz was using AI to describe images. Take a picture with your phone and have AI describe the picture or describe the video, and it's a lot of fun. There's Ray-Ban glasses and all kinds of tools to use AI for image description. And I think now, a year from now, next March, it's going to be about agentic AI and how AI agents can support us and people with disabilities and help accelerate our inclusion. But the flip side of that is there's dangers that it will accelerate our separation and division from society rather than inclusion. So I'm very concerned about that.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to watch to see how all that develops. So, Kirk, tell us about some of the projects or initiatives you're currently working on that you're particularly passionate about.
Yeah, one is called the APEX program, and there is a website at www.theapexprogram.com, APEX, and it is a nationwide initiative to launch blind people into cybersecurity careers. And I've partnered with a very innovative cybersecurity company called NovaCoast, and we've developed this 10-week training that's fully accessible for blind people who use screen reading technology to prepare to take the Network Plus and Security Plus certification exams. And we worked with Pearson VUE to make sure the exams are accessible. So it's really designed to do one thing, and that's get a blind person an entry-level job as a cybersecurity analyst. And we've got it set up in 24 states now, as far as partnering with the vocational rehabilitation agencies in those states that have money to pay for it. So people who are blind and have other disabilities who want to pursue this, they include it in their individual plan for employment. The vocational rehabilitation system can cover the costs. And then Voc Rehab can also work with the employers to assess their workplace, to pay for any special hardware and software the disabled employee might need, to pay for a salary during an on-the-job training period. There's also work opportunity tax credits at the federal level, state and local incentives. So it's a great program. It's pretty new. We've got about 100 blind people in various stages of the process. The first graduates are graduating and getting hired and getting great jobs. So that's one thing I'm very excited about.
Congratulations. That sounds like a phenomenal program.
It is.
So, Kirk, as the podcast comes to a close, what are your hopes for the future of disability inclusion and accessible innovation?
Well, the ultimate goal would be to have the same outcomes life outcomes for people with disabilities as the general population. So I mentioned earlier, only 35% of us are workforce compared to 70% of the general population. Our high school graduation rates are less, our college admission rates are lower. We're in a narrower range of occupations. A third of us live in poverty because of the unemployment situation. There's all kinds of health disparities and bad things that go along with poverty. So not in my lifetime, but I'm hoping that my efforts will move us closer to eliminating those disparities. When we look at quality of life, what are our measures of quality of life? We want them to be the same.
Kirk, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your incredible story and all the amazing work that you're doing to help with disability inclusion and accessible innovation. It's been really an honor to have you on the podcast today.
And I want to thank you for focusing on Disability Pride Month, which we are in. And I think it's really Disability Pride is kind of a reaffirmation of the social model of disability, that impairments are characteristics. We're only in disabling situations if there's a poor fit between ourselves and the environments that we've created as a society. And we should be proud of ourselves as human beings, no matter what our characteristics are.
Absolutely. I think that was a fantastic way to end this podcast. Thank you so much again, Kirk.
Thanks.
Dr. Adams, thank you for sharing your powerful story and visionary insights with us today. Your unwavering commitment to disability inclusion and accessible innovation is not just inspiring, it's a call to action for all of us in research commercialization and beyond. To our listeners, let's take what we've learned from Dr. Adams and turn inspiration into impact. Whether you're leading a tech transfer office, launching a startup, or advocating in your community, remember, true innovation leaves no one behind. Together, we can champion accessibility, break down barriers, and create opportunities and transform lives. If you want to connect further or explore Dr. Adams' work, visit drkurtadams.com and join the movement toward a more inclusive future. Thank you for tuning in to this special Disability Pride Month episode of Autumn on the Air. Stay curious, stay bold, and keep driving change, because the future of innovation is accessible to us all.
Thanks for listening to Autumn on the Air with Lisa Mueller. Get social with us and share your thoughts. You can tweet us at AUTM or visit us online at autm.net. We'll be back next week on the air. Be sure to join us.